What's happening, Wolfpack? Welcome back to another episode of Market Watch Mondays. I am your host. I am your Capitan. As usual, I will be guiding you through the dynasty space through the lens of a financial investment perspective. You guys know that's the name of the game. That's the theme of the show. I'm always about trying to teach people the tools that they need to dominate the dynasty leagues here. So that's what I'm going to do. I mean, you can see I'm recording during the day. I apologize in advance for the sun coming in, but the HQ is kind of right up against the window. We got the corner office here, but the sunlight does kind of shine in your face every once in a while. So that's one of the trade-offs I make when I pick this spot. Apologize in advance for that. I just got back today actually from going on a hike. We went for like a 10-mile hike in Mount Tam out here in California. For those of you know the Bay Area, Mount Tam's like a really cool spot where you can do like a bunch of trails. But let me tell you, your boy was struggling, man. I mean, it was basically either all uphill or all downhill. I don't know about you. I actually prefer uphill when I'm hiking because downhill is like places way more pressure on my quads, I think. So my legs get burned out really quick. So we started off like super downhill. Plus, you always risk the injury of like just basically wiping the fuck out and just like destroying yourself. So that's always a risk. But anyways, it was a good time. We had me and my girlfriend, a couple of her friends, and we brought our dog out. So our dog was my dog Clover was just like running up and down, up and down, up and down. So I'm sure she got freaking tired out. Actually getting a bath right now. She's pretty dirty. But anyways, it was a good time. But now it's time to get down to business. So I'm back here in the studio recording for you guys the next episode of Market Watch Mondays. And it's a special one for me, particularly because I don't know if you guys follow me on Twitter or not, but I am going to be launching my own Patreon basically, very shortly after this episode come out. This episode will go up, at the regular scheduled time so that all the 5 a.m. Eastern time degens will get access to the episode as they're used to it. But, for a lot of you guys that aren't watching that early, by the time you watch this episode, my Patreon would have already been launched. So I'll be launching that in the morning when I wake up so that I'm online and on Discord to welcome all the members to my new Discord and new Patreon. But that will be available, and I will link the link in the below. Actually, will I be able to link the below since I haven't linked it? I'll link it because I know what the URL will be and I know what the / is, but it's going to be patreon.com/our pack. Not my pack, not your pack, our pack. I'm trying to build a community here. I'm trying to gather all of the wolves and even train up the young wolves, man, so that you guys can continue to dominate in your dynasty leagues, because that's what we're all about here. It's a special day for me, so hopefully, those of you that have been rocking with me, if you can support me, please go to Patreon and support me. I can't thank you enough for anyone that does. I don't even know what to expect. I mean, I could launch this thing. I could have 10 members, and 5 of them are friends, and 4 of them is my mom and my dad, and some other family members, my girlfriend. So it might be that. Hopefully it grows more than that. I really do want to build a special community, but that is the only place from now on that you will be able to get access to my ranks. So my combined dynasty ranks, it's going to have by positional, by tier, but for those in the top tier of the Patreon, we'll also get access to my Devy and my Cornerstone rankings, which will have college prospects, and I'll have all of them combined as well. So you will have if you guys are doing Devy drafts out there, you'll kind of get a little insight into how I view Devy players with respect to NFL players. So if you guys are doing startup drafts and stuff like that, you'll be able to navigate it accordingly using this combined draft. I think it's pretty slick. I mean, it's not as slick as some of the Notion stuff out there from a visual perspective, but I think in terms of being able to automate stuff and just being able to have a very consistent set of rankings, that's what you're going to get with me in this new Patreon, because that full Devy set of rankings, the Devy players are actually just like built in and slotted into the NFL, and we'll have it by position, we'll have it by tiers, and my tiers will track across positions. So you will be able to tell, across the position group, how do I value certain players, so that when you're on the clock and people always say positions don't matter, I mean, that's really when positions matter. When you have a bunch of guys in the same tier, you're going to go for the position that you really want to tackle first. So you'll see how that works. It all communicate with each other, and all the rankings are done by me. So there's no inconsistencies. I look at it from a bird's eye view level, and then I go break it down each by position and by ranking set so that they all make sense. And so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that launch. Hopefully you guys are too. So if you can, head on over there and support me if you can, and I'll drop the link in the video below as well. So before we get to today's episode, though, you know what time it is, man. It's time to hit that intro. All right, welcome back. So, figured today I would take a chance to kind of just because I'm launching my Patreon, my rankings, I want to talk through like how to use rankings and like how you guys may have seen rankings be used in the past and how I approach rankings and how I use them in conjunction with a bunch of other tools to make sure that I'm doing the right thing, right? So that's one topic that I really want to cover. So that's what we'll start off with first. I think it's probably like a very misunderstood how rankings are really used and how rankings are really built. I mean, everyone has their own method, right? It's not necessarily one way is way better or way off than another. I'm just going to share with you like what I think how rankings should be built, at least for dynasty perspective, right? For redraft, it's a lot easier. Redraft, it should really just be like production based, right? It's like who's going to produce the most, that guy should be ranked the highest. When it comes to dynasty, right, we're rankings are going to have to account for multiple other factors, right? It's going to have to account for age, like basically how much production you need to get from them going forward. You got to account for value, which in my opinion is probably one of the most important things, right? Because if you build enough value over the long run, your dynasty teams will probably win. Now, I always stress, like, don't be scared to give up value to push your chips in for a win. But that's usually when you're already at the contending stage, which not many people are. Like I said, I only think in every league there's probably like maybe 2, maybe 3 tops that are really, really true top contenders, and the other ones are just kind of fooling themselves and trying to hope to get lucky, right? And so if you're not one of those 2 teams, and not all of my teams are always there, you're spending more time on the rebuild side, which is where you should be accumulating value. So the way I think about dynasty is not only just production. So if someone tells me like, hey, I have someone ranked as an RB1 because I think they'll produce as an RB1, that's not that interesting to me, right? Like I'm taking in multiple factors in my rankings to try and figure out how to use them and how to build them. Like to give you a very, very layman's way introduction to how I build my rankings, I start like player by player, block by block, and I basically go down my list and I say, would I trade this player for the player above, and vice versa? And if the answer is no, I would not give this player up for the current like lowest player ranked, then he goes in ahead of him. And I keep building that up for every single player. So to build my ranks, I basically go through like 250, 300 individual players, and I ask myself, if I was offered this trade, would I do it? Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it in terms of like thinking about it from a rebuild or contenders perspective, but my rankings are built on value. So it's not necessarily for a contender, right? I think it's more applicable to like across the board, and it can apply to contenders for sure. But I think I'm really just trying to project value of the players, and I think that's the key. I think that's how, to me, like that's how dynasty rankings should be measured. It really shouldn't be measured based on like, oh, like did this guy hit a wide receiver 1 season or wide receiver 2 season, right? Because if you look at someone like Cam Akers, if you try and judge based on that, it's a miss, right? Because he didn't finish as an RB1. But if you look at his value, he's a second-round startup pick. And last year, like for example, I was super high on Cam Akers and I ranked him a lot higher than a lot of folks, and I consider it a hit because the value has now changed. So even if you don't want to wait for him to realize that potential, you don't have to. You can trade him for like a second-round startup pick value or a third-round startup pick value at the latest in Superflex formats, right? So just that's some insight into how I build my ranks. And, you know, you guys out there, probably a lot of you build your own ranks as well. And there's a lot of other ranking sets out there. That's just the way that I think dynasty should be approached, right? Because you're trying to accumulate value, and a lot of the early on guys, rookies, like they're not going to come out of the gate and be like a top 12 wide receiver, right? Like not everyone is a Justin Jefferson, right? Not everyone is a T. Higgins. Not everyone is a CD Lamb. There are other guys out there that can still have value, and you can project more into the future, whether it's because they got injured or what have you, right? There's a multiple factors that I'm taking in when I kind of go and construct my ranking set, and to be honest with you, a lot of it is very subjective. It's just me like looking at all the data, looking at all the pieces, looking at the opinions, and then making my call, being like, hey, I think this guy deserves to be above, you know, XYZ, but does not deserve to be above ABC, for example, right? And then what I do is, as I'm going down the list of my combined players, I go like, this is where I think tier breaks are. And how my tier breaks work is the following. If I rank players, like I think rankings as a whole, like rank, 5, 6, 7, 8 is very, very meaningless when it comes to the grand scheme of things, because there's multiple things you have to account for your team, whether it's contender, rebuilder, et cetera, right? What I like to do and what I've been doing my entire time of playing Dynasty is using tiers. And I'm sure you've heard that term before, right? Tier-based rankings. For those of you that don't know what that is, basically when players are ranked within the same tier, so let's say, I have a ranking of the top 12, right? And like my top 3 are like CMC, Barkley, or like Mahomes, or something in that order, right? That forms like a tier for me, which means if I'm in that tier, I'm not trading one for the other unless it's addressing a need. So if I need a running back, I'll trade like a CMC. I'll trade like a Mahomes for a CMC, for example. If I need a quarterback, I'll trade a CMC for Mahomes. So they're very interchangeable assets within tiers. That's how I think about tiers. So when I build my ranks and I go through them and I ask myself like, hey, is this tier, do these group of players really represent the same similar terms of value from my own perspective, right? And that's how I think you guys should incorporate tiers. I've seen people do tiers a bunch of different ways, right? Sometimes the tiers, don't communicate across positions. Sometimes the tiers are like massive and they're too big or they're too small. Like if the tiers are too big or too small, like it's not that helpful because there isn't really much interactivity within the tiers. And if they're too big, like then there's like no point because you're just basically saying like, oh, like 20 players or whatever are ranked the same. So the way I think about tiers is that way. And people ask like, do your tiers have like a set number? Is it always like 5 to 7 or 10? Does it get bigger as you get later? Or is it smaller at the top? And generally I'd say like at the top, it might be a little bit smaller, but there's no pattern to my tiers. It's not like I go from like 3 to 5 to 7 to 8 as I go from like round 1 to 3 to 5 to 7. That's not really how it is. I'm literally just sitting there and looking at a cluster of players and saying, hey, do I value these guys the same? And that's really how I come up with the tiers. So it can vary. Like sometimes my tiers will have 3 players. Sometimes they'll have like 12 players, or sometimes they'll have like 7 or 8 players. It just really depends on where those groups and basically clusters of players are for me. So that's like a little bit of an insight into how I go about building a ranking set. And I know everyone else does it probably differently, and there's some really good rankers out there that are all over the place. Fantasy pros, they have their like ranking competition. I don't really follow that too much. I don't think that's too relevant for dynasty because of what I said before about value. It's not always about where you finish and how many points you score, although obviously that matters in terms of winning. But in dynasty itself, there's just so many other factors at play that you have to account for. There's so many different variables, and everyone values everything differently, right? That's why there's no right way or wrong way. Like I'm saying, this is just the way that I do it. It's the way to me that makes the most sense, right? I think what you'll see with my ranking set, for those of you that do end up subscribing to the Patreon, is I have like heavily weighted stuff towards like certain position groups at certain points of the draft, and the way I set it up is you can attack the players that I want based on the ranking set. So I will rank guys higher than ADP because I want you to land those guys, right? I don't want you to like, I want to land those guys. So I have no problems reaching for a guy that I believe in because I think their value a year from now or 2 years from now will be much higher than what it is today. So I just wanted to give you guys some insight into how rankings work. And even for those of you that don't end up joining me on Patreon, that's totally cool. I think this is I wanted to share this in terms of how I build my ranking set so that you guys can kind of do the same thing. Some people message me all the time like, hey, like you got me thinking about building rankings. I kind of want to do it myself. And I think that's a great thing, right? You should definitely build your rankings. Don't take my rankings for gospel. Don't take anyone's rankings for gospel. At the end of the day, it's your team, right? You manage it your way. But I do think what I see a lot of is like people will like download a ranking set, copy paste, and then like move a couple guys, right? That's fine and all, and it's cool just to spit a ranking set out there. But I really, really think that you should take the time to do the bottoms up build. So just take a list of like all the players that are relevant. Take the list of 300 players and just go one by one. And just one by one, build your ranking set. That's step one. So I build my combined ranking set, and then I'll like filter that list for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. Like do those each individual lists make sense? I think that's one step that like I see a lot of like inconsistencies in a lot of places, right? I think you miss that extra step. So you build a combined ranking set, but the combined ranking set isn't really what you use to draft. The positional tiers is really what you need to draft because you see how quickly the positions dry up as people fly off the board. So as you see QBs fly off the board, you might have to adjust and reach for a QB because there's too much value left at wide receiver, for example, right? But in order to do that, you build a combined ranking set and then you filter for each one. So like to bring things like full circle, right? So that when you're looking at it, everything makes sense. And that's why it takes me so freaking long to build rankings. And everyone's always asking me like, hey, when's your rankings coming out? When's your rankings coming out? It's like it takes good shit takes time to build. And that's the honest truth. Like it took me hours and hours just sorting through, and I'm like tweaking stuff all the time because I'll put together my combined ranking set. And again, to remind you all, it includes Devi, right? So I'm thinking about all of these things. And then I take that combined ranking set and say, what does this look like for my Devis? What does this look like for my cornerstone? What does it look like for my quarterback? wide receiver, running back, tight end, and I look across all these sets. I'm like, hey, does everything here now make sense? Does it truly represent how I value players, right? And then if it does, then it's like my ranking set is done. And that's where I'm at right now. My ranking set is done. It's ready to go. That's why I'm ready to launch my Patreon and I'm excited to really share that with all you guys. But again, that's like the whole process. So don't, like, a lot of people just slap together names, slap together rankings, or like copy paste rankings and then change a couple players to get some hot stuff. That's not the best way to do it. The best way truly to do it is to have a full list of just player names and build it yourself. And at the end of the day, yours might look super different than someone else's, and that's okay, right? Because it's your ranking set. It doesn't mean you have to draft exactly to it, but that is your ranking set. And that is the second step I want to talk about. How do you use rankings, right? Rankings is only one part of the puzzle, because if you, let's say you only draft during rankings, then you're totally missing another piece of the puzzle, which is like how the market values it. And now how the market values it can be very different, right? Depending on who you ask, and everyone has their own things. But, you know, the first part of that is understanding your own league. Obviously, I always talk about the theme of how, you know, fantasy, there's the macroeconomics, which is like how the general market views it, but then the more microeconomics, which is how people in your league values things. So understanding your league mates, if you guys haven't seen it, go back to one of my other episodes. I talk about how you take notes and what are the things you should track for each of your league mates. Do that. But then the macro part is probably, you know, what people are more familiar with. That's ADP, right? You know, a lot of people use ADP. They use mock ADP. I'm not a big fan of mock ADP. I know we launched the mock ADP for BDG. I think that's like pretty good because it's such a big sample size. We had like 72 mock drafts, right? But I think, you know, mock drafts are a little bit weak because you can't trade up and down in mock drafts. People are doing wild shit in mock drafts to try and like figure out their own strategies, right? So it's not always representative of the value there. So I would say, like, you know, having real draft ADP is super important. So I know, like, us at Big Dogs, we're going to be like compiling a lot of that stuff as we have real leagues go up. But if you don't have that, like, mock draft ADP is a good place to start, right? And then you got like trade calculators, right? So that's another piece. You got DTC, you know, big fan of Izzy and what those guys built over there. You got DLF trade calculators as well. Michael Zinger. I just call him Zinger. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Sorry about that. But I think it's at FF Zinger. From DLF. So those guys, brainiacs, built all these trade calculators. You got the Podfathers trade calculator, right, over at Roto Underworld. Another great product. So I think there's a lot of ways to kind of get there, but you need to take all those pieces in the puzzle, right? And I'll tell you why. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you value, just to be wild here, let's say you value Trevor Lawrence as the most valuable dynasty asset currently, ahead of Mahomes, ahead of everyone, and you rank him there. And I don't agree with that, but that's totally fair. That's your set of rankings, right? But if you proceed to draft him there, that's where you're leaving an edge on the table, because understanding the market definitely values Patrick Mahomes over Trevor Lawrence, probably values like CMC, Barkley, maybe like Watson, Kyler Murray, like a lot of these guys over in Trevor Lawrence, right? So understanding where you're at the market means you can trade back and acquire other assets and still get your guy. And that is the key to building dynasty. So having the rankings is the first part, right? And I look at my rankings when I'm drafting in order for the positional tiers to mark off how players are leaving and where my tier breaks are, so that I can make sure I can trade up or trade back if I think I'm in a tier. But understanding the other piece of it, which is ADP, helps you kind of like gauge where you can extract value, right? When you can trade back, when you need to trade up, where your tier gaps are, so that you can trade to make sure you stay within tier. And you know, the reason why tiering is so important is because, let's say it comes to you on the clock, right? You're in the top end of the first round draft, right? And you see like 5 or 6 guys that are in your tier still on the board, right? When you see that happen, you want to trade back. Because like I said, if players really are in the same tier and you built your tiers the right way, the ranking doesn't really matter that much, right? What matters is that you get one of the guys in the tier and extract values you can. So if you're at the top of the first or the bottom of the first round, for example, and you still have like 5 or 6 guys available in that tier group, what you can do is put that pick up and ask if anyone wants to trade up, right? Maybe someone else wants a guy. Maybe someone else is a different tier. Maybe someone else has only one guy left in that tier and they want to trade up, and you can get like a rookie first for that trade to move back like 7 or 8 spots, right? And the reason why I say 7 or 8 is because not everyone has the same tier as you. So there might be other guys that go ahead of them. So it pushes you back, right? So if you want to be safe, maybe only trade back like 4 or 5 spots, add a second round pick, right? There's lots of navigating you can do by understanding your own ranks, your own tiers, and then also what the ADP says. And obviously, don't go by law on the ADP because understanding your own league economics is important. Like if you know there's 4 or 5 other Trevor Lawrence stands that also think that he's the best thing ever, the best thing since sliced bread, obviously don't trade back because you're not going to land your guy, right? But understanding those pieces is super important, and trading back within tiers to land a similar talent in your eyes while adding draft picks is really the name of the game, right? And the way I view it, if I'm trading out of a tier though, is I got to get compensated a lot. If I'm trading within a tier, you don't have to pay me that much because I'm just trying to get what I want, what I can to kind of extract a little bit of value to still land my guys. But if you're trying to force me to trade out of a tier, that's where I'm going to ask for a lot. And that's where like understanding all this stuff in the trade negotiations and the trade craft comes into play. So you need to understand your ranks. You need to understand trade calculators. You need to understand ADP. And everyone, like, I know people like mock trade calculators and they mock ADP and all that stuff. And I do too sometimes. But understanding it is important. Like the reason why what you don't want to do is like live and die by them, right? You don't want to live and die by a trade calculator. You don't want to live and die by ADP, but understanding that tool and understanding what the weaknesses are with that tool is absolutely to your advantage. So that's why I don't hate on trade calculators. I think they're a pretty important part of the game. And I think people that don't look at them are honestly leaving information on the table and leaving the edge on the table, which I never do. So that's what I would call like a more wholesome picture, right? You have the rankings, the ADP, the mock draft ADP or real draft ADP, whatever it is. And the last piece that I do really consider is like Twitter, right? And Twitter is not something, it's more of like a contextual piece, right? Because there's no numbers to it, but I get a gauge for the market because to me, Dynasty is like momentum trading, almost like irrational trading, right? You're basically trying to project trends in the masses that really influence people, especially if you're in like analyst leagues or like leagues with people that are on Twitter and consuming the same type of content you are. Understanding where that momentum is going is super important. And I basically make a lot of the profit on my trades by making moves of where I think the market is trending based on, some big people in industry, shifting market views or just general sentiments and acting on that before like the masses do. So if you're with me on Patreon, I'm going to be sharing all this stuff in there. I have a trade channel where I drop like the players I'm going after well before it hits the public. So that's just another benefit there. But if you're on here, you're also getting more than the public because even though you're not getting it at the same time as my Patreon, I do try and share like a lot of my knowledge and a lot of my takes on this channel as well. So again, those are just a lot of the pieces of the puzzle that I think need to be considered, and don't really discount any of them because I think they're all an important piece in order to form that overall opinion on something, right? So you have the ranks again. You have the ADP, again, you have the trade calculators, and you have the Twitter like sentiment, hype cycle, and all that stuff, and how the Twitter hive mind thinks. For all of my mocking and joking about the old Bird app, like I actually do think it's a pretty good resource, and I spend a ton of time on it, not just to engage with people, but also just like consume like content, just understand what's going on. I don't necessarily like take any of it for law or go there to like drastically improve myself as a dynasty gamer because a lot of people that I respect I'm like talking with in DMs or text and stuff, so I'm getting that info there. But I do think it's important to kind of get some of that sentiment. But the one thing I guess I will say about Twitter and stuff like that is when you go on Twitter and you see a lot of players say like, oh, you got to sell this player, you gotta sell high, you gotta buy low. Take that with a grain of salt because, for example, like all the people that are saying to sell James Robinson, like none of them have any James Robinson, right? That's a prime example. Like you always see people go on a sell, and then the other piece is like trying to understand, what the cost of sell is because a lot of times you go on Twitter and people are like, oh, I need to sell this player, like we got to get off him, and then you ask them what they're willing to take, and it's like above market value. So it's like that's not really a sell then, right? You're just saying basically you want outsized return for players, which I will take for any player. It doesn't matter if I like them or not. If you're giving me outsized return, I'm gonna definitely be down to trade them to you, right? So just be careful on there, but there is some pretty interesting info and definitely stuff that you want to see. So that's what I really wanted to cover. Like the main topic is how to build rankings, how I build rankings, but more importantly, how to use rankings in the context of like a bigger picture of everything, right? So having all of those tools like side by side when you draft is going to be pretty key. And as we get into peak draft season, I'm gonna start doing more coverage. You guys know that I do the ADP stuff for BDGE, so I'll have lots of insights there as well for all of you guys. So as we get more deep into that draft season, you're gonna see a lot of that come out as well. But I really wanted to take that time because I think the common misconception is like you build a ranking set and you just draft to the ranking set, right? And that's not really how it is. And then the other part of it is like I see a lot of people just use the draft rankings to draft, but like there's another piece of it which is like how to trade with them, right? So those are often like honestly pretty divergent if you think about it. Like when I look at like value in a startup draft versus like value in a trade later on once the league is established, there's like some pretty big discrepancies, right? And the reason why is because in the startup draft, I say this all the time, right? Everyone thinks they can be a winner, right? Everyone is a dreamer. Everyone has really high hopes for their team. So everyone's like going for the same assets and trying to win, right? But once you're in the league and like, reality sets in and, a full year has been played, you kind of know who the strong contenders in your league are. You kind of know who the rebuilders are. So everyone's kind of, the values completely shift because, people are going for different targets. They have different goals in mind. They have different aims in mind. Like maybe the rebuilders, they aren't going for running backs anymore because they know they need a longer shelf life. They need the QBs. They need the wide receivers, right? Whereas contenders are trying to load up on running backs. Whereas in the startup draft, probably everyone is trying to go for running backs. So just understanding that dynamic is also super key. I think that's something that like most people don't really focus on that much. And I'm rambling a bit now, but I just wanted to get that last piece out there that's literally popped up in my head right now as I was talking through all this. We got pro days coming up. We got the draft coming up in about a couple months here. So you're going to be rolling into peak dynasty season. And what I want you to take away from this entire thing is that it's not enough to just have a ranking set ready, right? And just go by that. You need to really, really incorporate and capture like all of the other tools, right? And then the last thing I want to talk about is maybe just a couple of quick player hits. Number one, I want to talk about Courtland Sutton right now. I've talked about him a couple times before, I think, and I'm sure like a lot of other guys I've seen in the industry talk about him as well. But I still feel like even with the attention that he's been getting as of late, he is still pretty undervalued, right? And the reason why I say this is because, when I see people talking about Courtland Sutton and like what they would be willing to give up for him and stuff like that, it's usually somewhere in the range of like a second round pick, maybe like a super late first. And I think at those prices, it's still pretty damn undervalued because what he's shown already to us is that he is an alpha wide receiver, right? He did it in his sophomore year with a revolving door of Joe Flacco and Drew Lock, a couple of the bottom feeding quarterbacks in the league. He had a pretty damn good analytical profile coming into the league. He's got the prototype alpha size, and talent doesn't really change, right? Situations can change. I don't expect Drew Lock to be the starting quarterback there for too long. So if they do bring someone else in, it's going to be like wheels up. Like imagine if they somehow land Watson. I know that's very, very, very low odds, probably never going to happen. But even if they just trade up and draft like a Trey Lance, for example, right? I think the long-term outlook for someone like a Courtland Sutton would be pretty damn impressive. And Courtland Sutton's still not even 26 years old. So he's a young guy that I'm trying to grab in all my leagues, I think. But I think people have like kind of clued in that I'm a big fan of them. And, one of the downsides of being in the position that I'm in is like whenever I go approach trades for someone, they're already like kind of a little bit skeptical trading with me. So that's one of the disadvantages. But my disadvantage is your advantage because I think the mainstream people and most people in common leagues, I probably forgot about him a little bit. He got hurt this year, but you should go out there and acquire a Courtland Sutton. I think you don't have to do it. If I had to, I would toss out like a mid-first round pick for Courtland Sutton because I think he could be the cornerstone of your dynasty team. Okay, so that's Courtland Sutton, absolute stud. Go out there, acquire him, do whatever you can. Overpay a little if you have to because I honestly think that a year from now, like whatever you paid is going to look like, it's going to look like nothing. Because if I were to bet on a super undervalued wide receiver to have a chance at cracking that like top 10, like top 5 potential, like superstar potential, I do believe it's Courtland Sutton with a quarterback. And I know that's a lot to ask, but if those two things align, I think he's going to be an absolute fantasy monster, right? And the last person I just want to cover a little bit is someone that I'm not as high on as consensus. And that person is Diontae Johnson. And Diontae Johnson is currently going as wide receiver 30 per BDGE February mock draft ADP. Again, that is from 72 different sample mock drafts. And when it comes to Diontae Johnson, wide receiver 30 sounds disrespectful, but trust me when I say this, having built my ranks again from the ground up player by player, the wide receivers they're just that deep. It's not disrespectful to put him in wide receiver 3. I really think the title of like wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 needs to be reconsidered because the gap between like a wide receiver 2 and a wide receiver 3 really isn't that big from a points per game basis, in my opinion. And I know people are going to say, like, Diontae Johnson is a target monster when he's on the field. He gets a bunch of targets. I get that. This with Big Ben. Big Ben's been unloading targets on him, but I just don't see it, man. Like, I'm concerned from a little bit from a health perspective, but also he just happens to be like one of the most inefficient wide receivers like in the league. I joked about it in the season, but he's basically like a running back. It's wild to see like that level of efficiency on that volume of targets. It's not, we don't really see it that often, and I believe targets are earned, not given. So if you are very inefficient with them, I think those targets go away. So people always talk about how you got like double-digit targets like in a bunch of games where he was starting. That's true. I have a lot of Diontae Johnson on my teams. He looks like a really good player, but at some point you need to transfer from an efficiency perspective, right? But I think the more important thing here to highlight is who's going after him, right? And so for me, it's not really about me hating Diontae Johnson. It's me preferring other guys at ADP lower than him. And this is where understanding that market value perspective is really important, comes into play, right? So if I look at Diontae Johnson, here are the guys that are going after Diontae Johnson. Number 1, Rondale Moore. Give me Rondale Moore over Diontae Johnson every time. I understand he's a prospect. I understand there's risk involved with him being a prospect, and we've seen some stuff from Diontae Johnson, and I've liked what we've seen so far to a degree. But Rondale Moore is an incredible prospect, in my opinion. If he were to hit, I think the value jump, like if Rondale Moore had like a decent enough rookie year, the value jump from him is going to dwarf the value jump from Diontae Johnson. Because look at what Diontae Johnson's already done, and he's still only valued as a wide receiver 30. So I'm trying to really think about the value long term. So for someone like me, if Rondale Moore's going after him, I'll take Rondale Moore every single time. I think Diontae Johnson like should be valued as like maybe like a late first, early second tops, right? And people disagree with me, but that's kind of like where he is if you look at ADP, because Rondale Moore is like going for that early second, late first range. And so if I would much rather swing on a Rondale Moore over someone like a Diontae Johnson, just given the stuff I talked about. I'm a big fan of him from an analytical profile perspective. He's a high percentage hit in my opinion, and if he does hit, the value jump there is going to be absolutely massive, right? Another player going below Diontae Johnson, Laviska Shenault. I'm a big fan of Laviska. I've been a big fan of him as a prospect. He showed like pretty decently out on his first year, but now he's got Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer obviously used Curtis Samuel to the max of his potential. So I'm really excited to see how they use Laviska. What I think is they're going to line him up a lot in the backfield too, to kind of take some of those receptions away, and then also just use him as a very hybrid tool, right? Hybrid tool, and he's a freaking beast, man. This guy is a beast. I don't know if you guys watch him play. I get hyped every time I watch Laviska Shenault play last year. And from a value perspective, Laviska's going as the wide receiver 30. So again, 3 spots behind Diontae Johnson. If I could do it straight up, I would do it in a heartbeat. So anything I can get added on top would be straight gravy. So I'm a big fan of Laviska Shenault. And then the other 2 guys I think super undervalued, Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, right? Cooper Kupp has already shown wide receiver 1 upside. Robert Woods is a perennial wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 1. And I would just much rather have them. They're a couple years older than Diontae, but Diontae was also an older prospect as well. So give me the proven asset of Cooper Kupp. So the reason why I chose Diontae Johnson is because if you look at this mix of bucket, right, it's Rondale, Laviska, 2 less proven but younger, higher upside players, and then you have 2 proven vets, which is Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. So take your pick out of that group and give me any one of them over a Diontae Johnson if Diontae Johnson is truly being valued as a wide receiver 30. And then even Deebo Samuel, right? Deebo Samuel is someone that I think is pretty interesting. He kind of has, he's weird in that he's like super A-dot and basically uses running back, but he's very good at getting yak. He's one of the best in the league. So, and he's valued at like wide receiver 41. So there's just too much value there at wide receiver later on, which is in my opinion, you either have players with higher value upside than him, or you have players that have more proven production and offer you more as a contender in the current season than Diontae. So for those reasons, I'm like pretty much out on Diontae Johnson. for this season. And, for someone that was actually in on him as a rookie, I thought he was pretty damn good, and I got him for value there. I picked him up in the third round of a lot of drafts. I thought that was a good buying point, but if he's being valued now as like a late first or, super early second, I think I'd rather try and roll for one of these other studs or one of these other like high upside young rookies. And, I'm sure I'll get a lot of hate from like people that, think he's a target monster, and he absolutely was last season. But I think there's just like a lot of red flags there for me to kind of go all in on him. So those are two players I want to cover really quickly. A must buy in Courtland Sutton. Do everything at your disposal to try and grab him. I think he's going to be a monster in the upcoming seasons. A super buy high on Courtland Sutton. If you have to pay up for him, do it. And then I think it's time to kind of get out and sell high on a player like Diontae Johnson, because I personally don't see it. I'm trying to project again from a value perspective. I think I would much rather have some of these other guys. So if you agree with me, great. If you don't, drop in the comments and let me know why. I'm always interested to hear about the other side as well. So that's all I got for you guys this week. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure you subscribe below, hit the thumbs up, and follow me at Mike Me Up with 2 P's on Twitter and Instagram. Same thing. And also on Clubhouse. If you guys don't know what Clubhouse is, it's basically like a live chat Q&A session. You have to get like invited to kind of join the platform, but they're sending a lot of invites now these days. So if you guys have some friends on there, I'm sure you guys can grab an invite. So I'll be on there like hosting live chats and stuff like that as well. So follow me on there. And then lastly, I will be launching my Patreon today. So follow the link. I'll probably drop it in the description. And it won't be live yet for some of you that are watching super early in the morning. But for most of you that are watching after like 8 o'clock Pacific time, which is probably when I'll be up, it will be live. So head on over there to patreon.com/OurPack. And you will be able to join up in that community and live, and I'll be in the Discord. It'll be bumping. I promise you, I will give you my all. So thank you guys for even considering it. And for those of you that join, I will see you guys in the Discord and welcome you there to the pack. That's all I got for you guys. Peace out.